I signed away my entire life savings, $650,000, to veterans organizations yesterday afternoon. My hand didn't even shake as I put pen to paper. My family won't see a dime of it. Not my daughter, not my son, not my 3 grandchildren, not a single penny. And despite what they'll tell you when they find out, I'm not crazy, confused, or being manipulated by anyone. This was the most clear-headed decision I've made in years. My lawyer, Richard, watched me carefully as I initialed each page of the new will. I could feel his eyes on me, probably wondering if I'd change my mind. He'd been my attorney for nearly 30 years, had drafted my original will back when the kids were teenagers. I knew what he was thinking without him saying a word. "You're absolutely certain about this, Frank?" he finally asked, his voice neutral but his expression concerned. "Once you sign this final page, we'll file it, and your previous arrangements will be null and void." "I'm certain," I said, my voice steadier than the storm brewing inside me. "The Wounded Warrior Project gets half, Disabled American Veterans gets the other half. My house, my investments, my savings, all of it." The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Through the window, I could see people going about their day on the street below, normal people with normal families who probably weren't sitting in lawyers' offices disinheriting their children. I felt a momentary pang of something, not regret exactly, but acknowledgement of how far things had fallen. I've been taking blood pressure medication for years now. Recently added an antidepressant too, though I don't advertise that fact. My doctor says my mind is sharp as ever. My body's slowing down at 72, but I can still drive, still live independently in the house where I raised my family, still manage my own affairs. The medications help keep me steady, but they don't cloud my judgment. If anything, they've cleared away the fog of denial I'd been living in. Richard slid the final page toward me. "And you understand your children will likely contest this?" "Let them try," I said, signing my name with a finality that felt both terrible and liberating. "I've documented everything, the psychological evaluation, the financial records, the text messages. They can bring whatever lawyers they want." When you reach my age, you start thinking about legacy, what you'll leave behind. Not just money, but the mark you made. I served in Vietnam. Not something I talk about much, but it shaped me. Those men I served with became brothers. Some never made it home. Others came back changed, forgotten. For years, I've donated small amounts to veterans' causes, but this is different. This is everything I have. So, Richard gathered the papers, his face professionally blank. "I'll file these today. Is there anything else I can do for you, Frank?" I shook my head. "No, but thank you for not trying to talk me out of it." "It's not my place," he said, though I could tell he wanted to. "But I've known you a long time. This isn't like you." I almost laughed. If he only knew what I'd discovered 6 months ago. How the betrayal had started small, a missing watch, unexplained withdrawals from my checking account, before growing into something I couldn't ignore or excuse away. How my own flesh and blood had looked me in the eye while systematically taking advantage of me, thinking my age made me an easy mark. As I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sun, I felt lighter somehow. The decision was made. The money would go to people who deserved it, who had sacrificed, not to those who saw me as nothing more than a wallet with an expiration date. The betrayal still hurt, a deep, hollow ache that the medications couldn't touch. But I'd found a way to turn that pain into something meaningful. I hadn't told my children yet. That conversation was coming, and it wouldn't be pretty. But first, I needed to go back through everything that had led me here, to make sure I could explain, clearly and calmly, exactly why I had done what most fathers would consider unthinkable. It was last winter when everything changed. February, I think, one of those bitter cold snaps that make your bones ache even when you're healthy. I wasn't healthy. The flu had taken hold 3 days earlier, but this was different. My temperature had climbed to 103, then 104. The room would spin whenever I tried to stand, and my throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. I remember calling out for Michael, my son. He and his wife Diane had moved in 6 months earlier, supposedly to help care for me after my hip replacement. The arrangement made sense at the time. My 4-bedroom house was too big for just me after Eleanor passed, and they were between situations, as Michael put it. I later learned that meant they'd overextended themselves on credit cards and couldn't afford their rent anymore. That afternoon, I needed help. My prescription bottles sat on the nightstand, but my hands shook too badly to open them. The water glass was empty. The sheets were soaked through with sweat. I called out again, my voice barely a rasp. "Michael, Diane, can someone bring me some water and my medication?" No response. The house wasn't that big. They had to hear me. I tried to push myself up, but the room tilted violently and dark spots clouded my vision. I fell back against the pillows, my heart racing from even that small effort. The ceiling fan above me seemed to be spinning in slow motion, then speeding up, then slowing again. I closed my eyes against the vertigo. That's when I heard them. Their voices drifted up through the heating vent in the floor, a quirk of this old house that Eleanor and I had discovered years ago. You could hear conversations from the kitchen with perfect clarity. "He's been calling for almost an hour," Diane was saying. "Shouldn't you check on him?" "He's fine," Michael replied. "Probably just wants attention. You know how he gets." "I don't know, Mike. He sounded pretty bad this morning." There was the sound of a refrigerator opening, bottles clinking. "Look, the doctor said it's just a bad flu. If it gets serious, we'll take him to the hospital. Until then, I'm not playing nurse." A pause. Then Diane's voice, lower now. "What if it is serious, though? I mean, at his age—" "Then we finally get out of this holding pattern." My son's voice had a tone I'd never heard before, impatient, almost eager. "Dad's sitting on a gold mine with this house. The neighborhood's gone up 3 times in value since he bought it. We're talking $700,000 minimum." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my fever. "Plus his investments," Diane added. "Your name is still on everything as the beneficiary, right?" "Oh, everything. We could pay off our debts, buy our own place, a nice one, not another rental, and still have plenty left over." I lay there, the fever making everything seem distant and dreamlike, yet the conversation cut through with terrible clarity. My son, my only child, was discussing my death as a financial opportunity. The inheritance I'd worked my whole life to provide had become not a gift, but a finish line they were waiting to cross. "He's been looking worse every day," Diane said. "Maybe we should call someone." "And say what? My elderly father has the flu? They'll just tell us to keep him comfortable. Besides, nature takes its course. If it's his time—" I didn't hear the rest. A wave of nausea forced me to roll over, and I retched weakly into the wastebasket beside the bed. My vision tunneled, and for a moment I thought they might get their wish sooner than expected. But something else stirred in me then, something beyond the fever and pain. Anger, determination, a sudden fierce will to live that I hadn't felt in years. I needed to survive this, and then I needed to make some changes, significant ones. Looking back, I can trace every callus on my hands to something I did for Michael. When he was accepted to State University, I picked up weekend shifts at the warehouse, 16-hour days stacking pallets and loading trucks. My supervisor would joke that I lived there. Some weeks he wasn't far off. I'd sleep 4 hours, shower, and head right back. My lower back still seizes up from those years, a permanent souvenir from moving all that freight. The tuition bills came quarterly like clockwork, $12,000 here, $14,000 there. His mother had passed when he was 14, so it was just me figuring it out. I emptied the vacation fund we'd been building since he was born, sold the boat his grandfather left me, refinanced the house twice, but I never complained. Not once. When Michael called to tell me he'd made Dean's List his junior year, I sat in my truck in the warehouse parking lot and cried like a baby. That moment alone was worth every double shift. When he met Elise during his senior year, I was thrilled. Smart girl, good family. They got engaged right after graduation, and I remember Michael calling me, worried about affording a proper wedding. "Dad, we might just do something small," he said. I wouldn't hear of it. I'd been putting aside a little something each month in a separate account. Not much, $50 here, $100 there when I could swing it. By the time they were engaged, I had nearly $28,000 saved. "You're my only son," I told him. "Let me handle the wedding." The look on his face when I handed him that check, I thought I'd done something right as a father. After they married, the economy tanked. Michael lost his entry-level position, and Elise was still finishing her master's degree. "Just until we get on our feet," Michael promised when I offered them the finished basement apartment in my house. 3 months turned into 3 years. I never charged them rent, covered all the utilities, stocked the refrigerator. I figured they needed every penny to build their future. During that time, I had to turn down knee surgery twice. Couldn't afford the downtime from work with 3 mouths to feed. Now I can't walk upstairs without wincing. When they finally found good jobs and talked about buying their own place, I was both proud and a little sad. The house would be quiet again. But I wanted to give them one last boost, the biggest one yet. I'd managed to save just over $200,000 through decades of careful living. I offered to put down half on their dream house, a beautiful $450,000 colonial in a good school district. "For my future grandchildren," I said, trying to keep my voice steady when I handed them the check for the down payment. What gets me isn't the money, though God knows that's a lifetime of labor sitting in those walls. It's that somewhere along the way, thank you turned into, that's not enough. The gratitude I saw in Michael's eyes when he was younger has been replaced with something else. Expectation, entitlement, like my sacrifices, were simply his due. Last Christmas, I overheard Michael and Elise in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping, just coming in with more firewood. "Your dad could easily help with the landscaping costs," Elise was saying. "It's not like he has anything else to spend it on." Michael laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Trust me, we're in the will. We just have to wait a little longer." I stood there, arms full of split oak, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. 67 years old, with a body broken from manual labor, and my son was casually discussing my death as a payday. I set the wood down quietly and went back outside. I needed air. I needed to think. Because that moment made me question everything. Every sacrifice, every double shift, every skipped vacation and postponed surgery. Had I raised a son or just financed an ingrate? It was remarkable how quickly things changed after I mentioned the inheritance. I was still feverish, lying on their guest bed with a damp washcloth on my forehead, when Diane poked her head in to check on me. I'd been there almost 2 days by then, mostly sleeping and feeling miserable. Up until that point, she'd been cordial but distant, bringing me water or soup when Michael reminded her, but otherwise keeping her distance. But that afternoon, something shifted. I'd been on the phone with my financial advisor about some paperwork for the estate. I wasn't trying to broadcast it, but the walls in their house are thin, and I mentioned the figure, $800,000, when discussing the main account that needed to be transferred. I hung up just as Diane was passing by the door. Within 20 minutes, she was back with fresh tea, homemade soup, and a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked, placing her hand on my forehead. The dad caught me off guard. In the 7 years she'd been married to Michael, she'd never once called me that. "About the same," I said, my voice still raspy, "but thank you for the soup." "You know," she said, perching on the edge of the bed, smoothing the blanket with a careful hand. "I was thinking I should take you to the pharmacy. Get you something stronger for that fever. The good stuff they keep behind the counter." John, I noticed her eyes darting to my phone on the nightstand, then back to me. There was something calculating in that glance that made me uneasy, even through the fog of my fever. "That's thoughtful," I said, "but I think I'll stick with the Tylenol for now." "Well, if you change your mind," she lingered, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "So I couldn't help overhearing. That's quite an inheritance Margaret left you." There it was. I nodded, taking a sip of the tea she'd brought. Margaret was always careful with money. We both were. "It's wonderful that you have that security," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Have you thought about what you'll do with it? I mean, at your age, it must be comforting knowing everything's taken care of." I watched her face as she spoke. There was an intensity to her expression that hadn't been there before, a tightness around her mouth, a focus in her eyes that made me think of a cat watching a bird feeder. "I haven't made any decisions yet," I said carefully, still processing everything. Of course," she said quickly. "But you do have a will, right? Everything squared away? Michael and I were just talking about how important that is." I doubted very much that my son had been part of any such conversation. Michael hadn't even come to check on me today. I could hear him downstairs, the sound of sports commentary drifting up from the living room. "My affairs are in order," I said, not elaborating. The fever made my head pound, but it hadn't dulled my instincts. Something felt wrong. Over the next few hours, Diane checked on me 6 times. She brought fresh water, adjusted my pillows, asked if I wanted the window open or closed. When Michael finally came upstairs, he looked surprised to find her sitting beside my bed, showing me pictures of their recent vacation on her phone. "Since when are you two so chummy?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Diane's smile tightened. "I'm just taking care of your father. He's not feeling well." Michael shrugged. "Whatever. Dinner's in an hour." He left without asking how I was feeling. That night, despite my fever, I lay awake listening to their muffled voices through the wall. I couldn't make out the words, but Diane's tone was insistent, urgent. Michael's responses were shorter, disinterested. Then I heard my name, followed by a number, 800,000. The conversation grew more heated after that. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, suddenly feeling much colder than my fever warranted. Something had changed in this house, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stay long enough to find out exactly what. The car ride to Pearson's pharmacy felt like it lasted hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. My fever had spiked again that morning, and the chills were coming in waves. I'd bundled up in my old wool sweater despite the mild spring weather and still couldn't get warm. Marissa, my daughter-in-law, had insisted on driving me. "You're in no condition to be behind the wheel, Walter," she'd said, and I couldn't argue with that. So the silence between us felt heavy until she cleared her throat. "So, Walter," she began, her voice casual in that practiced way that immediately put me on edge. "David and I were talking about some of the family paperwork we should probably get in order." Her manicured nails tapped against the steering wheel. "With you being sick and all." "I've got a bad case of the flu, Marissa. I'm not dying." My voice came out raspier than I'd intended. "Of course not," she said quickly, eyes fixed on the road. "But it got us thinking about the future. David mentioned you updated your will last year after Margaret passed. We were just wondering if everything was settled." The car suddenly felt smaller. Through the fog of my fever, something cold and clear cut through. This wasn't the first time the topic had come up since I'd fallen ill. 3 days ago, it was questions about the house deed. Yesterday, about my investment accounts. "Everything's in order," I said, turning to look out the window. "Frank at the law office has all the paperwork." I didn't mention that Frank also had my explicit instructions about the trust for my grandchildren, money that would bypass their parents entirely. Marissa's smile tightened. "That's good to hear. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, and that everything goes smoothly when the time comes, which won't be for a long time, of course." We pulled into the pharmacy parking lot, and I couldn't get out of that car fast enough, despite my aching joints. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, and the familiar medicinal smell was oddly comforting. Tom Pearson looked up from behind the counter and smiled. He'd been filling my prescriptions for over 20 years. Was there for all of Margaret's medications during her battle with cancer. "Walter, heard you were under the weather. Got your doctor's call this morning about the new antibiotic." Thanks, Tom. I leaned against the counter, suddenly lightheaded. You all right there? Tom's bushy eyebrows furrowed with concern. Just this fever. Can't shake it. Marissa stepped forward. The doctor said this new medication should help. We're very concerned about him. Chantes? Tom nodded and turned to his computer. Let me get that ready for you. Should only take a few minutes. I patted my pocket and felt nothing but empty fabric. Damn it, left my wallet in the car. I looked at Marissa. Got the keys? She hesitated, then handed them over. I can get it for you. No, need the fresh air. Feel too hot in here. I needed a moment away from her questions, her watchful eyes. As I shuffled toward the door, I glanced back. Marissa was already at the counter, leaning in close to Tom, speaking in a low voice I couldn't make out. Tom's face was professional, neutral, as he continued preparing my medication. Outside, the cool air hit my face. My hand trembled as I unlocked the car door. The wallet was there on the seat, but I paused, suddenly gripped by an inexplicable dread. Through the pharmacy window, I could see Marissa still at the counter. Her purse was open. She was showing Tom something. A paper? A prescription? Her hand moved toward the counter where my medication would soon be. My heart pounded against my ribs. The fever made everything seem dreamlike, surreal, but the fear cutting through it felt razor-sharp and real. I clutched my wallet and stood frozen, watching the scene unfold through the glass, suddenly terrified of what might be happening to my medication in my absence. I had to get back inside, now. When I returned to the pharmacy counter, something felt off. The air between Melissa and the pharmacist, Mr. Chen, according to his name tag, was thick with unspoken tension. They both startled slightly when I approached, as if I'd interrupted something important. Mr. Chen's normally friendly demeanor had hardened into something professional but cold. Melissa was fidgeting with her purse strap, her smile too bright when she turned to me. "Did you find what you needed, Frank?" she asked, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "Just some cough drops," I said, placing them on the counter. My fever was making everything seem slightly surreal, but I wasn't so delirious that I couldn't recognize when something was wrong. "Everything okay here?" Mr. Chen glanced at Melissa before answering. "Your prescription is ready, Mr. Holloway." He handed me the white paper bag, but held on to it a moment longer than necessary, making deliberate eye contact. "Please make sure you read the instructions carefully. These are exactly as your doctor prescribed them." The emphasis wasn't subtle. I nodded, confused, but too exhausted to question it. Melissa quickly paid for everything, her movements jerky and rushed. She practically steered me toward the exit, her hand firm on my elbow. "Let's get you home," she said. "You're burning up." We were halfway across the parking lot when I heard footsteps hurrying behind us. "Mr. Holloway, wait, please." Mr. Chen was jogging toward us, his white coat flapping. Melissa's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "What now?" she muttered. "We've got everything." The pharmacist caught up to us, slightly out of breath. He glanced around the parking lot, then lowered his voice. "Mr. Holloway, I need to speak with you privately. It's about your medication." "Beast. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of me," Melissa insisted. "I'm taking care of him." Mr. Chen's expression hardened. "Actually, that's precisely why I need to speak with him alone." He turned to me. "Sir, while you were looking for cough drops, I observed your daughter-in-law tampering with your prescription. Suck." The world seemed to stop. Despite my fever, a cold clarity washed over me. "That's ridiculous," Melissa sputtered. "I was just looking at the label." "We have security cameras above the counter," Mr. Chen continued steadily. "They captured you opening the bag and adding something to the medication bottle. I've already called the police and preserved the footage." "Cheo," I turned to look at Melissa. Her face had drained of color, but there was something else there. Calculation, not shock or outrage. "Frank, he's confused," she said, her voice trembling. "You know how devoted I've been to your care. Why would I do something like that?" The answer came to me with startling clarity, cutting through the fog of my fever. The life insurance policy Robert had insisted I take out last year. The one that named him as beneficiary. The one Melissa had asked so many questions about. "What did she put in my medication?" I asked Mr. Chen, my voice steadier than I expected. "I don't know exactly," he replied, "but I replaced your prescription with a new one. The police will test the tampered medication." "Bon," Melissa's face contorted. "This is insane. Frank, you're delirious with fever. Let's go home and we can sort this out." I stepped away from her, clutching the prescription bag to my chest. "I think I'll wait for the police." Her expression shifted then, the caring mask slipping completely. "You ungrateful old man, after everything I've done for you." In that moment, I saw her clearly for perhaps the first time. I thought about the steadily worsening symptoms that had started shortly after she began preparing my meals, the mysterious falls, the confusion that would come and go. As we stood there in the parking lot waiting for the police, I realized this wasn't the first attempt. It was just the first time she'd been caught. Now I had to figure out how deep this went, and whether my own son was involved in trying to kill me. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty when we left. Just a few scattered cars under the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and unreal. Marissa held my elbow as we walked to her car, her grip firm but not comforting. I could still feel the lingering weakness in my legs, the strange hollowness in my stomach that wasn't just from being emptied at the hospital. The doctor's words echoed in my head. Severe food poisoning, unusual symptoms. We'd like to run more tests. But Marissa had insisted we go home, saying I needed rest in my own bed. As she helped me into the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of her face in the dome light. There was something in her expression I'd never noticed before, a tightness around her mouth, a calculation in her eyes that seemed to be measuring something. She closed my door with a thud that felt final, like the closing of a trap. The interior of her car had always felt comfortable before. Now it felt like a cage. The leather seat was cold against my back, and the faint smell of her perfume that once seemed pleasant now made my stomach turn. I watched her hands on the steering wheel, the same hands that had prepared the soup that sent me to the emergency room, the same hands that had insisted I eat every last spoonful. We drove in silence. The streetlights swept across her face in rhythmic intervals, illuminating, then shadowing her features. I pretended to be more exhausted than I was, letting my head rest against the window, eyes half closed, but watching. Every few minutes, she would check the rearview mirror, not just for traffic, but with a nervous intensity that seemed out of place. Was she looking for police cars? The thought hit me with startling clarity. She was afraid. The night outside was pitch black, making the car feel smaller, more confined. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional click of the turn signal. That silence stretched between us like a living thing. I had known this woman for 6 years, trusted her with my home, my son, my life. Now I was trapped in a metal box with someone who had tried to kill me. Because I knew now. I knew with a certainty that settled into my bones. The food poisoning wasn't accidental. The way she'd insisted I eat that soup, how she'd watched me with that strange intensity, how quickly she'd disposed of the leftovers before I was even in the ambulance. The pieces fit together with terrible precision. My mind, foggy from medication just hours ago, was now razor sharp. Survival instinct, dormant for decades of comfortable living, surged through me. I needed to think, to plan. I couldn't confront her here, trapped in this car. I needed to get home, to safety. Though the bitter irony wasn't lost on me, that home was where she lived too, where she had access to my food, my medications. She checked the rearview mirror again, then glanced at me. I kept my breathing even, playing the role of the weakened father-in-law. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer Richard the trusting father, the generous provider who had welcomed his son's wife into his home. I was a survivor now, a strategist. I would need to watch every cup of coffee, every pill, every meal. I would need to document everything. As we turned onto our street, the familiar sight of my house came into view. The porch light was on. Michael must have left it for us. My home of 30 years now looked different to me. Not a sanctuary, but a battlefield. And as Marissa pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine and plunging us into silence, I realized the most dangerous part of my journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's get you inside, Richard. You need your rest." Her voice was honey over steel. I nodded weakly and reached for the door handle, already planning my next move. The pneumonia finally began to release its grip after 3 weeks of antibiotics and rest. My body was weak, but my mind had never been clearer. While I'd been confined to that bedroom, something fundamental had shifted inside me. I wasn't just going to lie there and watch everything I'd built slip away. Not without a fight. I started small. When Margaret brought my laptop just to check emails, I waited until the house was quiet. Then I began researching estate law, business succession planning, veteran support organizations. I'd clear my browser history each time, keeping my digital footprints hidden. My illness provided the perfect cover. Everyone assumed I was just resting or watching old movies on my tablet. As my strength returned, I established a routine. I'd join the family for breakfast, putting on what I now recognized as a performance of normalcy. I'd smile at Margaret's suggestions about scaling back my involvement in the business. I'd nod when Jason talked about his innovative directions for our contracts. All the while, I was taking mental notes, building my understanding of exactly what they planned. "Dad's really coming around," I overheard Jason tell Margaret one evening as I was supposedly napping in my recliner. "He seems more accepting of stepping back." "The pneumonia scared him," she replied. "Makes our timing perfect, really." Perfect timing indeed, but not in the way they imagined. By the 4th week, I was well enough to drive again. I told Margaret I was going to the hardware store, maybe stop by the office briefly, just to say hello to everyone. Instead, I drove to a law office 30 miles away in Fairview, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew me. The lawyer, Patricia Winters, specialized in business law and estate planning. I'd found her through careful research, impressed by her work with several veteran-owned businesses. Her office was modest but professional, nothing flashy. That suited me fine. "So you want to protect your legacy," she said, after I'd explained my situation, careful to stick to facts rather than emotions, "and ensure your business continues to serve the veterans you intended to help." "Joe, that's exactly it," I said. "This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about preserving what I built and its purpose." Over the next 2 weeks, I made 3 more hardware store trips to meet with Patricia. We developed a comprehensive plan that would protect the core of my business while establishing a clear structure for veteran support. I also connected with the Veterans Employment Alliance, a nonprofit that helped place former military personnel in civilian jobs. Their director, a retired Army colonel, immediately understood my vision. At home, I played the role of the recovering patient, gradually coming to terms with stepping back. I even suggested to Jason that he take the lead on our next contract bid. His surprise quickly turned to enthusiasm as he began outlining changes he'd make to our proposal process. I listened attentively, asking questions that revealed more of his plans without showing my hand. Margaret seemed pleased with my apparent acceptance. "You're being so reasonable about all this," she said one evening. "I was worried you'd fight us every step of the way." I just smiled and said, "Sometimes getting sick gives you perspective on what matters." She had no idea how true that was. What mattered was ensuring that the business I'd built with my sweat and sacrifice continued to serve its purpose, providing opportunities for veterans who'd served their country. I wasn't going to let it become just another profit center for my family's comfort. By the time I felt fully recovered, Patricia had the paperwork ready. The Veterans Employment Alliance was on board, and I had transformed from a man who felt betrayed to a man with a plan. The next step would be the trickiest, implementing these changes without tipping my hand too early. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was back in control of my own creation. I invited them to the dining room that evening, the same place where they'd tried to poison me. There was a certain poetic justice to it. I'd set out 3 folders on the table, one with the lab results, one with the revised will, and one with the security footage. I'd also invited my attorney, who sat quietly in the corner, there to witness whatever happened next. When Michael and Diane entered, they were all smiles, asking if I was feeling better. I noticed Diane's eyes darting to the folders on the table, her smile faltering just slightly. I gestured for them to sit down across from me. "I'm feeling much better," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "In fact, I've never seen things more clearly." I opened the first folder and slid it toward them. "This is a toxicology report from a private lab. They found significant traces of warfarin in the soup I ate last week. The same soup only Diane prepared and only I consumed." Michael's face drained of color. He turned to Diane, who had gone completely still. "What is he talking about?" he asked her. Before she could answer, I opened the second folder. "This is my new will, executed yesterday. It leaves nothing to either of you. Instead, my estate will go to a trust that supports victims of elder abuse." Diane's composure cracked. "You can't do that. We've been taking care of you. We gave up our lives to move in here." "To move in here and wait for me to die," I corrected her. "But you got impatient, didn't you?" I opened the third folder and turned it so they could see the still images from my security cameras. Diane in the kitchen, measuring something from a small bottle into the soup pot, then carefully putting it away in her purse. Michael stared at the photos, then at his wife, horror spreading across his face. "Diane, tell me you didn't. Tell me this isn't what it looks like." She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on me, calculating even now. "It was just to make you a little sick," she finally said. "So you'd need more help. So you'd see how much you need us." "It was rat poison," I said flatly. "Warfarin in high doses causes internal bleeding. You weren't trying to make me sick. You were trying to kill me." Michael put his head in his hands. "Oh my God," he whispered. Diane reached across the table. "Please," she begged, "don't go to the police. Think about Michael. Think about your son." "Joe, the son who stood by while his wife tried to poison me? The son who hasn't once asked how I'm feeling right now?" I looked at Michael, who couldn't meet my eyes. "So, here's what's going to happen," I said. "I'm not going to the police, not because either of you deserve mercy, but because I don't want to spend whatever time I have left dealing with court appearances and criminal proceedings." Relief flooded Diane's face, but I wasn't finished. "You have 7 days to pack your things and leave this house. I've instructed my attorney to prepare restraining orders that will be filed if either of you ever contact me again or come within 500 feet of me or my property." "Dad, please," Michael finally spoke. "Where will we go? What will we do?" "That's not my concern anymore," I said, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. "You're both adults. Figure it out." Diane stood up, her face contorted with rage. "You can't just throw us out. This is our home, too." "No," I said quietly. "It never was, and it never will be." My attorney stepped forward then, handing them each a formal notice to vacate. 7 days, he repeated. "And Mr. Harmon has been generous. The evidence here would support criminal charges for attempted murder." They left the dining room in silence. I heard Diane start to cry in the hallway, but it sounded more like frustration than remorse. Michael said nothing at all. I sat there for a long time after my attorney left, looking around at the house that had felt like a prison for months. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt like I could breathe again. The next week would be difficult, having them still in the house, but I had security now, and I had the truth on my side. Soon I would have my life back. They left on a Tuesday morning. 3 cars packed to the brim with hastily gathered belongings, clothes hanging from hooks, boxes stacked precariously in trunks. My daughter wouldn't look at me as she herded the kids into her SUV. My son-in-law kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched as he loaded the last of their things. The grandkids waved from the back seat, confused but excited for what they'd been told was an adventure to visit relatives in Ohio. I waved back, my smile genuine for them alone. I stood in the driveway until the small convoy disappeared around the corner. No dramatic goodbyes, no tearful pleas for forgiveness. Just the quiet finality of car doors closing and engines starting. The lawyer had given them 30 days. They took 14. Walking back into the house, I braced myself for the emptiness. For 68 years, I'd never lived alone. From my parents' home to college roommates, to marriage to widowhood, to this ill-fated family experiment. The silence should have been deafening. Instead, it felt like a long exhale after holding my breath for years. I wandered from room to room, noticing the small scuffs on walls, the indentations in the carpet where their furniture had stood. The guest bedroom, my bedroom for the past 3 years, now empty except for my few possessions. The master bedroom was mine again. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the quilt Martha and I had picked out together 30 years ago. "You were right," I said aloud, as if Martha could hear me. "You always said I was too trusting." I smiled, imagining her gentle, "I told you so." She'd been the cautious one in our marriage, the one who insisted we keep our finances separate from the kids, the one who'd set up trusts instead of giving cash gifts. I'd thought she was being overly careful. Now I knew better. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, finalizing the details for something I hadn't done in decades, a vacation just for me. 3 weeks in Europe, starting with London, then a train to Paris, followed by a week in Italy. Martha and I had always planned to do it when I retired, but her illness came too soon. Now I would go alone, but I'd carry her with me in every cathedral and museum. I also pulled up the documents my new estate attorney had prepared. No more vague promises about who would get what. Someday. Half my assets would go to a scholarship fund at the local community college where I'd taught for 30 years. The other half would be divided between 3 charities Martha had supported. The house would be sold, with proceeds going to the same places. The grandkids would each get a modest trust for education, accessible only when they turned 21, with no parental access. As night fell, I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, another small pleasure I'd denied myself these past years. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds I'd almost forgotten. I wasn't lonely, I was free. The weight of disappointment had lifted, replaced by something lighter, something like possibility. People often say blood is thicker than water, but they forget the full proverb. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The family we choose, the promises we keep, these matter more than accidents of birth. I loved my daughter, would always love her, but I'd learned that love without boundaries becomes a weapon that can be turned against you. Tomorrow I would call my old colleagues from the college, accept those lunch invitations I'd been declining. I'd join that senior hiking group Martha had found for me years ago. I'd live the life we'd planned, just differently shaped. At 72, I was starting over, but with the wisdom to know that endings are just doorways to something else. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to close a door firmly and walk away.